All right, the 2024 Corporate Legal Operations Compensation Report has just dropped a couple weeks ago. There's been a lot of chatter on social, a lot of chatter about what's in this report. So I wanted to spend a little time going through it live with you all and sharing kind of my thoughts. So let's dive right in. First, it's by Bright Flag and the folks at Legal Operators. I want to say thank you to Kevin and Colin from these organizations in doing the very hard work needed to put something like this together. It is very important work. It needs to be done. I think it's a great report. Nothing against this report in particular, but as many of you know, I don't love surveys and benchmarks generally, particularly in legal ops, because it is a nascent field. And what I find is that sometimes we end up benchmarking against each other's early mistakes. It's also really hard, as we'll get to talking about, in looking at apples and oranges, we're not able to really draw conclusions from people across different organizations because we're defining the roles and the responsibilities and the titles so differently in every organization. But really valiant efforts in putting this together. I think there are really good things in this report that I do like, and I want to take some time to go through those with you today. As a side note, we did a study on legal ops compensation back at Clock when I was still president. We did our own salary survey. I believe what we ended up doing is burying the results when I saw them. And what I mean by that is we decided not to publish them more broadly or even publicly because the results that came back were simply too low. And I thought that sharing those results would have been more harmful than helpful to the industry. Because if the numbers are too low, it would allow hiring managers to anchor on those low numbers and say, oh, that's what the whole industry is paying. That's what we should pay. Now, who am I to decide that the numbers are too low? I don't know, but you know that I've always been an advocate for this role and to make sure it's scoped properly, leveled properly, and of course, compensated fairly. The other thing to note is that when you're dealing with HR teams, and they're setting the compensation, they're going to be looking at things like Radford studies, the global compensation databases, which currently doesn't have a section for legal operations. So what they end up doing is looking in legal for some other non-attorney or non-practicing lawyer role. We end up being compared to paralegals, contract managers, legal assistants, law librarians. And as you all know, that's just wrong, right? The scope of the role, the level of the role, the value, the impact, the responsibilities are completely different from these other non-attorney roles. And so we should not be benchmarked against those. So this is really important work that does need to take place. All right, let's go through this report that came out a couple weeks ago in March by Bright Flag and Legal Operators. Thank you to Kevin and Colin. Great job. All right, getting in. Geography and vertical. Looks like most of this was United States, most in California, most in technology. Doesn't surprise me. That's a lot of the birthplace of legal ops and a lot of where the community resides. Okay, demographics, department size, and experience. Okay, let's see. This we're familiar with, right? The survey suggests that professionals working in the smaller legal departments were impacted by reductions in force recently. It also suggests, that those who are earlier in their career were perhaps impacted more than before. I think that it's likely that opportunistic legal ops roles, those folks who perhaps were paralegals and elevated into these roles were eliminated due to budgetary pressure because I think, yes, if you don't scope the role correctly, you're not going to see that true immediate value. And at the same time, I believe there's been a flight towards more experienced legal op professionals. That also jives because as we get out there, as we're talking more, as we're sharing our stories, GCs are getting more and more educated. And I find that now they're understanding what business skill, what level of experience is needed to operate at that higher level. And they're looking to find people here. It says, the flight to more experienced legal ops professionals. I think that's true. I think that is kind of what I'm seeing. All right, organizational structure. This report skews to heads of legal. More than 60% are heads of legal. This is interesting to me. Although most of them are heads of legal, only 54% have people management responsibility, which means you have some heads of legals who are individual contributors. All right, so let's pause here because This is why I think it's so hard to compare compensation across our industry. Apples to apples. These are heads of legal operations. Well, what is a head of legal operations, right? If you only if you're the only person in your organization who does legal ops, let's say that you're at a local bank that manages a few things for your legal department on behalf of a total of 10 people in the legal department. Are you not the head of legal ops? Absolutely, you are. You're the solo head of legal ops. Okay. Well, at the same time, if you're at a Fortune 100 company, and let's say you're managing a huge scope of role, acting as the right hand to the general counsel, you're managing a team of, let's say, 50 people, you're rolling out systems, tools, strategic plans. Are you not also the head of legal ops? You are. So, do we think we're able to fairly look across these two heads of legal ops and make sure that they're compensated the same way? I think not. In fact, I would argue that one of these should make closer to, let's say, $100,000, and the other one should make closer to $1 million all in. Same title, very, very different roles, very different responsibilities. Again, nascent industry. We are not all defining these roles the same way yet. So while this is very informative, it's very difficult for us to do true comparisons. Okay, true. Let's see. Drivers of compensation. Here we talk about title. Yeah, I love to see how much the titles have elevated over recent years. So, again, really good work that our industry has done. I do think so. First of all, I love seeing everyone in director and above. I love seeing a lot more VPs, even senior vice presidents in these titles. It's fantastic. I do think there has been some inflation in titles so that, if you're a director of legal operations, it says here, look how big that range is of total compensation. Director of legal ops, depending on the size of your organization, depending on how it's defined. So I think the titles, correctly so, are not that reflective anymore because I think titles are, frankly, inflated these days. All right, understanding the compensation when it comes to what makes up the components of compensation. As we know, there's salary, there is bonus, there is equity. Every company is going to have a different combination of these three elements. There are some that are mostly, if not all, salary. Some companies have bonuses, some don't. Some are mostly equity or partially equity or no equity. Okay, so again, depending on the size, the stage, is it public, is it private? How do you compare across these three types? I think it's very difficult to do so. In some of the reports that I've seen that are probably more helpful, we look at just salary because at least that is something that we can compare as maybe apples to apples. So, okay, so let's keep going. Compensation benchmarks as we look at heads of legal operations. This is by department size. I like to scroll down to the bottom. We're looking at companies with departments of over 100 people. Hello, we have a company that's paying $10 million in total compensation. If that is you, give me a call. Let me know what day to start. Love to see that. I'm not sure that's correct, but if that's true, that's wonderful. We're moving in the right direction. Again, here, I think it's hard to look at the heads of legal operation based on the size of your company because you're looking at anything from 64 to 400. That is a huge range. Even here, 75 to 380. Like, can you really compare that? These are even bigger ranges. So really hard to look at title, really hard to look at size of company, really hard to look at size of department. It's about your background. It's about your scope of role. I'm going to skip over the other legal operations roles. These are members of the team. Such a broad range. We go from entry level to, a director. So where could those be? Those are going to be all over the place, and rightly so. That's not incorrect. All right, another driver of compensation. And this is where we had a lot of controversy, discussion fueled by this report that came out. So 75% of respondents are women, which completely is, reflective of what I think and I have experienced in the legal ops profession. It is a female-heavy profession. I think in my experience, honestly, it's probably closer to 65% women, but, here's who responded to this survey in particular. The pay equality or the gender pay gap that is apparent looks like it had grown over the last year. In my experience, just doing conversation, not true surveys, but understanding where people are, I think there is a bit of a gender pay gap. Now, I'm not sure what the driver of that is. And this is another reason why I think a lot of metrics, benchmarks, reports are great in driving conversation and raising questions, not always answering the questions, but this does raise a lot of questions. And we have to ask ourselves, well, what is the makeup of this? Is it because more women, I don't know, have been paralegals and have risen up through the ranks this way, whereas others who are practicing attorneys who move laterally are men? I don't know. Maybe that's one hypothesis. That's something that I would dig into. Again, are we looking at the same backgrounds, same geographies? Are they in office? Are they remote? There's a lot to dig in here. But I think, the fact that there is a pay gap is something that we should be aware of and noting and seeing if we can dig into why that is and what we can do about it. And just having this conversation be fueled by this report is already a step in the right direction. So that's great. All right. Ethnicity, I think same thing. Okay, we're going to go to professional background. Paralegal at least in this report, was the most common career path. I'm actually seeing a major shift from that in my own experience. It looks like half this report came from the paralegal or administrative background. I'm seeing much more come from other business roles, operational roles. We have management consulting, we have attorneys. Some are even starting in legal ops, which is very interesting. At the same time, let's see, I think having a paralegal or admin background continues to be a hindrance when it comes to pay. Now, there's a lot in here. I will wonder, is that because you're still in a hybrid role? Is it because you're being elevated from your current role just slightly to take on more responsibility, but they're not seeing you as separate and or different than the role that you used to operate in? It is very challenging for one to move from a legal support role into a legal leadership role in the same organization and be viewed differently, and to then jump career ladders and pay grades. So I think that is a challenge. Whereas if you're an inside attorney and making that change, it's a lateral move. You're already paid very well. And so hence the delta. That's what I think we're seeing. All right. So which brings us to my favorite page, and the page that I think is the most interesting to me in this report because it is the most valuable. The reason I say that is because if we can get just this part correct, I believe the rest should trickle down and fix itself, right? So are the people in the big companies with the big teams and the big scopes being compensated fairly? If they are, then I believe their teams will be compensated fairly. And if the top companies in the world are doing it right, then they will be the model that everybody else looks at. So again, this is why I really like this page. In addition, I'll share with you all, I did a little experiment of my own earlier this year, and I reached out to a group of hand-selected leaders and did my own 2023 compensation or salary survey. So we looked at salary and total comp for leaders at what I would call Fortune 100 and or Global 100 companies, managing some significance of a team in truly strategic and executive level roles, having broad and executive level scope. So again, I handpicked these people to make sure that I thought, and they knew who else was in this cohort. As we looked across that cohort, we thought, yes, these people should be compensated across the same sort of band. And I think looking at this page, we probably, ended up in this top half, or this part. This feels like it was in line with what I found from people, again, at the larger companies with the right scope of role. So this is, I think, a great result that we're sharing this, that we got this kind of result into this publicly published survey, because if we can use this page as a guide for what the big companies are doing, the rest will figure itself out. So that is my review of the 2024 Legal Ops Comp Survey. Thanks again to Kevin and to Colin for doing the hard work. And hopefully the trend continues to move up and to the right with better, not just titles, which we are already seeing, but in terms of scope of role, level of experience, and the right pay. See you next time.